They said nothing survived long in Maple Creek once the blizzards rolled in, where wind howled through empty streets and cages froze beneath the snow. But that winter morning, when frost clung to every window and breath turned to ice, Officer Ethan Brooks stumbled upon a sight that stopped his heart. Two German shepherds locked inside iron cages, half buried beneath the storm. They said those dogs were gone for good. Stolen, beaten, forgotten by the world. Yet when Ethan knelt beside the frozen bars, their eyes met, and something fierce, wordless, and unbroken flared back to life. What happened next would shake the quiet town to its core. A tale of loyalty, vengeance, and the fire that refuses to die, even under snow. Before we begin, tell us, where are you watching from? And if this story reaches you, stay till the end, because in the cold of Maple Creek, some hearts never freeze. Maple Creek, Colorado, lay buried under a storm that refused to end. The sky was the color of cold iron, and the wind howled through the narrow streets like something alive and angry. Snow had fallen for 3 straight days, layering the world in silence so thick that even the sound of boots on the frozen ground felt like an intrusion. At the edge of town, where the old market met the abandoned rail yard, the metal fences rattled in the wind, like ghosts shivering. It was here that Officer Ethan Brooks found himself walking after a long night shift, his breath clouding in front of him, his mind heavy with the exhaustion only loneliness could carve. Ethan was 38, broad-shouldered, tall, and worn by years of chasing danger he never asked for. His hair, once a deep chestnut, had started to gray near the temples. A faint scar crossed his jawline, a reminder of the warehouse explosion 6 months ago, the same night he lost his 2 K9 partners, Duke and Shadow. Since that night, Ethan had changed. His voice, once easy and warm with his team, had become quieter. He avoided laughter. He spoke little. People at the station whispered that he carried ghosts in his eyes, but no one dared to ask which ones. The snow bit through his uniform as he passed the shuttered stalls of the winter market. Most of the vendors had gone home early, driven away by the storm. Only one figure lingered, Sarah McKinney, the baker's wife, known around Maple Creek for her sharp tongue and kind heart. She was a tall, thin woman in her 50s, her hair streaked with silver and always tied in a neat bun. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and her eyes darted nervously toward the empty lots. "Officer Brooks," she called, her voice trembling slightly. "You might want to take a look behind the old fish market. There's something strange happening there. Men, cages, I don't know. It didn't feel right." Ethan thanked her with a curt nod, his instincts sharpening. Years of patrol had taught him that in Maple Creek, when something didn't feel right, it usually wasn't. He turned down the narrow alley behind the market, where the smell of rust and frozen garbage hung in the air. The snow was deeper here, half covering old crates and metal drums. Through the curtain of white, he saw movement. 4 or 5 men standing around 2 large cages. They were dressed in heavy coats, faces shadowed by hoods, their hands gloved and restless. Ethan slowed his steps. He could hear the faint clink of chains and the soft whine of something alive. His hand instinctively brushed against the holster at his side, but he didn't draw. He stepped closer until one of them turned toward him. The stranger's face was rough, unshaven, eyes sharp and hollow like a scavenger's. "Can I help you, officer?" the man asked, his tone mockingly polite. Ethan's eyes had already locked on the cages. 2 German shepherds crouched inside, ribs visible beneath filthy fur, muzzles raw from rubbing against iron bars. A crooked sign was taped to the cage. For sale, $1 each. For a second, Ethan thought his mind was playing tricks. But then one of the dogs lifted its head, and he saw it. One ear bent slightly to the left, the small scar above the right eye, the exact pattern of markings he'd memorized years ago. Duke. And beside him, a darker shepherd with a patch of white on his chest. Shadow. His heart slammed in his chest. For months he had searched every lead, filed every report, combed through shelters and forests, refusing to believe they were gone. Yet here they were, alive but broken. The taller of the men stepped forward, smirking. "You want to buy them, officer? $1 each. Good deal." Ethan ignored him, taking a step closer to the cages. "Where did you get these dogs?" he asked, his voice low, controlled. "Found them," the man replied, shrugging. "Nobody wanted them." His grin was the kind that came from knowing you held something cruel over someone else. Ethan's jaw clenched. "Step back," he ordered, his hand finally resting on his weapon. But before he could form another word, the men scattered, vanishing into the swirling snow like shadows dissolving into the wind. Within seconds, they were gone, leaving only their footprints and the sound of rattling chains behind. Ethan dropped to his knees beside the cages. Duke whimpered, pressing his nose against the bars. Shadow tried to stand, but fell back, too weak. Ethan reached through the cold metal, his gloved hand trembling as he touched their fur. "Duke, Shadow, it's me," he whispered, his breath catching. "It's Ethan." For a moment, the dogs didn't move. Then Duke's tail gave the faintest wag. Shadow let out a low, broken whine that cut through the wind like a plea. Snowflakes clung to Ethan's eyelashes as he looked around. No one else was there. Only the wind, the cages, and the memories of a night he could never forget. He fumbled for his keys, trying to unlock the rusted padlock. The cold made his fingers numb. "Hang on, boys," he murmured. "I've got you." But as he reached for the second lock, the world split with a sound that made his blood freeze. A gunshot, distant but sharp. It echoed across the frozen alley, scattering a flock of ravens from the rooftops. Ethan jerked up, scanning the white horizon, heart hammering. Somewhere beyond the storm, someone was still watching. He gripped the bars tighter, his breath ragged. "You're safe now," he said under his breath, though even he wasn't sure he believed it. Then, in a voice barely more than a tremor, he whispered, "You're really them, aren't you?" The snow swirled harder, swallowing the sound of his words, until only the echo of that single gunshot remained, carried away by the storm. The morning after the gunshot, Maple Creek looked as if the storm had swallowed the whole town overnight. The sky hung low and gray, and snow drifted across the streets in ghostly veils. The market square was deserted, except for the flashing red and blue lights of patrol cars. Officers moved quietly through the scene, their boots crunching against the frozen ground, tape fluttering in the bitter wind. The air smelled of cold metal and fear. Officer Ethan Brooks stood near the two rusted cages, his coat dusted with frost, his eyes fixed on the trail of footprints that led away from the site. Deep impressions in the snow, long and dragging as if something heavy had been pulled toward the woods. The cold gnawed at his fingers, but he didn't move. Every instinct screamed that whoever had left those tracks wasn't far. "Brooks!" The voice came from behind him, sharp and impatient. It was Sergeant Alan Pierce, A man in his early 50s with a heavy build and a face weathered by years of night shifts and disappointment. He had thinning blonde hair, a mustache gone gray, and eyes that could read lies faster than a report. Alan had been Ethan's supervisor since his rookie years, a man of few words but the kind of loyalty that didn't need explaining. "You're supposed to be home. You were off duty when you found this." Ethan didn't look at him. "They're mine," he said softly. "Duke and Shadow. I lost them 6 months ago." Alan sighed, pulling his gloves tighter. "I know, and I'm sorry. But now it's evidence. Let the team handle it." His tone softened for a second, his voice lowering. "You've been chasing ghosts since the warehouse explosion. Don't lose yourself again." Ethan turned, eyes hollow but burning. "I'm not losing myself, Alan. I'm finding them." The sergeant stared at him a longer moment before nodding. "Then at least do it right. Follow the prints before the storm covers them." With Alan's reluctant blessing, Ethan followed the tracks past the fence line, his boots sinking into the snow. Duke and Shadow limped beside him, free now but fragile, their movements slow and stiff. Duke, the older of the two, was 7 years old, larger, his coat a mix of sable and black. Even weakened, his stance showed the discipline of a lifetime of training. Shadow was younger, 4 years old, leaner, with darker fur and sharp amber eyes that seemed to catch every flicker of movement. Both dogs bore scars, some healed, others still fresh, and faint burns around their necks where the collars had cut too deep. As they moved through the woods, the wind howled through the pines, carrying with it the distant cry of crows. The trail split near a ridge, one set of footprints veering left, the other straight ahead. Ethan crouched, brushing snow away to see the pattern more clearly. One set was heavy, boots with steel heels, military or construction. The other lighter, staggered. Someone had been dragging something. He raised his head just as the radio at his belt crackled to life. "Brooks, this is dispatch," came a calm, feminine voice. Officer Lauren Reyes, one of the youngest dispatchers at the station, known for her composure under pressure. "We've got a report of shots fired near the old freight line, half a mile from your position." Lauren was 26, sharp-eyed, and quietly determined. She had a habit of double-checking every file, every route, because she didn't trust luck. Her older brother had been a state trooper killed during a botched arrest 2 years earlier. Since then, precision was her religion. Ethan pressed his radio. "Copy that. I'm close. I'll check it out." "Backup's en route," Lauren replied. The forest grew denser as Ethan moved forward, Duke and Shadow staying close, their breath fogging in the icy air. He found shell casings half buried in snow and a torn piece of black fabric snagged on a branch. The edge was burned, and the fabric smelled faintly of oil and smoke. Someone had fired recently and run. Ethan pocketed the casing and turned back toward the road, but a movement caught his eye. Through the trees, a shape shifted, tall, thin, wrapped in a dark coat. For a moment it stood still, watching him. Then it was gone, slipping deeper into the white blur. He called it in. "This is Brooks. I've got a visual on a possible suspect moving north toward the ravine." Static crackled. Lauren's voice came faintly. "Copy. Proceed with caution." By the time Ethan reached the ravine, the trail had vanished. The storm had swallowed everything. Only the faint, metallic scent of gunpowder remained. He exhaled slowly, lowering his weapon. Duke pressed his head against Ethan's thigh. Shadow circled, ears perked. They sensed the unease in him. Hours later, the investigation wrapped. The forensics team collected the cages, the signs, the prints. But no suspects, no vehicles, no names, just questions. That evening, Ethan drove through the snow to the Maple Creek Veterinary Clinic, a small brick building tucked between two frozen oaks. Inside, the warmth hit like a wave, and the scent of antiseptic filled the air. The clinic's owner, Dr. Mia Chen, emerged from the back room. She was in her mid-30s, short and slim, with dark eyes that missed nothing. Her black hair was tied into a practical ponytail, and though she spoke softly, her words always carried quiet authority. "Ethan," she said, surprised. "It's been a while." "Too long," he murmured. "I need your help." When she saw the dogs, her expression changed. "Oh my God." She knelt beside them, hands gentle but steady as she examined their wounds. "They've been starved, beaten, and look here." She pointed to a faint number burned into Duke's ear. K9 2147. "This isn't random. Someone marked them." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Gang identification?" Mia nodded grimly. "Possibly. Whoever did this knew what they were doing." Duke whimpered softly as she bandaged his paw. Shadow watched her warily, tail low but eyes alert. Ethan stood silent, the weight of realization pressing on him. This wasn't just cruelty. It was a message from someone who knew him, someone who remembered the night 6 months ago when the warehouse fire had consumed more than evidence. When the treatment was done, Mia offered a quiet smile. "They'll live," she said, "but someone wanted them to suffer." Ethan looked at the security camera in the corner. Its red light blinked steadily. He turned to leave, his coat heavy with snow. As he reached the door, the light flickered twice, then stayed solid. Someone was accessing the feed remotely. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. The air was too still. Ethan looked once over his shoulder toward the clinic, then into the empty street beyond. Somewhere, a car engine hummed before fading into silence. He adjusted his collar and whispered to himself, "This isn't over." Behind him, in the corner of the clinic, the camera's red light pulsed once more, steady, unblinking. Night fell over Maple Creek like a slow suffocation. The snow that had started as a whisper now came down in relentless sheets, piling on rooftops and burying fences, turning the world into a white, soundless grave. The roads had vanished beneath the drifts, and even the distant hum of town life was gone. For Ethan Brooks, the silence was both sanctuary and warning. He drove his old black Ford pickup through the storm, the wipers fighting a losing battle. The headlights caught the edge of the forest, where the trees stood like sentinels of ice. It was nearly midnight when he reached his cabin, a small wooden house he'd built years ago, tucked on the border of the pine woods. Once it had been home to laughter, barking, and the quiet comfort of companionship. Now it was a shelter against ghosts he couldn't name. Inside, the warmth from the fireplace licked the walls with faint orange light. Duke lay stretched near the hearth, his ribs still faintly visible beneath his thick fur. His eyes were closed, but his ears twitched at every sound outside. Shadow, smaller and more restless, paced near the window, his dark coat glimmering in the firelight, his breath fogging against the glass. Both dogs seemed unable to fully relax, trained instincts too deep to ignore. Ethan shed his snow-soaked jacket and rubbed his temples. The scent of pine and smoke filled the cabin, but it couldn't chase away the chill that had settled in his bones. On the table lay the veterinary report from Dr. Mia Chen, the one he couldn't stop reading. Burn patterns consistent with branding. Subjects show signs of prolonged confinement and malnutrition, suggest trauma-related stress responses. Each word pressed into his chest like weight. He looked toward the dogs. "We're home now," he murmured. "You're safe." Yet even as he said it, Duke's head lifted, ears alert. Shadow gave a low growl. The sound was faint at first, a rhythmic hum, mechanical, distant. Ethan crossed to the small monitor on the wall and switched on his security feed. The screen flickered, static slicing across the image before it steadied. There, through the swirling snow, a dark shape loomed near his fence. A truck, large, matte black, its engine idling quietly. The license plate was obscured by grime. For a few seconds, nothing moved. Then the headlights flashed once before the truck reversed slowly into the woods and vanished. Ethan's stomach knotted. He remembered Sergeant Alan Pierce's warning. The Denver ring's still out there. Their leader, Victor Kane, he's not the type to forgive. Kane's name was a ghost from the past, one Ethan had hoped would stay buried. 2 years ago, Kane had run a sprawling narcotics network across the Rockies, ruthless, meticulous, and charming in a way that made people underestimate him. The man had once been a decorated soldier before turning to crime, using his tactical training to build an empire. When the operation was finally brought down, it was Rex, the department's K9 before Duke and Shadow, who had led the team to Kane's warehouse. But Kane escaped in the chaos, vowing revenge on anyone connected to the sting. Ethan's hand brushed the scar on his jaw, a souvenir from that same raid. He'd seen Kane once up close, a tall man, late 40s, his face angular, hair silvered but cropped short, eyes a shade of cold steel. There was something military in the way he moved, precise, unhurried. The kind of man who could smile while breaking someone's bones. Ethan hadn't seen him since. Until now, perhaps. He stepped onto the porch, gun in hand. The wind slammed against him, cutting through his clothes like knives. Snow swirled under the weak porch light, glittering in the air. He looked down and froze. Fresh footprints. They circled the house, looping back toward the woods. Not random wanderers. Someone had been casing his property. The pattern was deliberate, measured. He crouched, tracing one with his gloved hand. Heavy boots, deep tread, military or tactical issue. From the tree line came the faintest crack, like ice snapping. Duke barked once, sharp and low, while Shadow pressed close to Ethan's leg, his fur bristling. Ethan aimed his flashlight into the darkness, catching only falling snow and the ghostly shimmer of frost. Nothing moved, but something was out there. He could feel it, the same sixth sense that had kept him alive too many times before. He backed toward the door, never taking his eyes off the forest. "Inside," he ordered. The dogs obeyed instantly, slipping through the door. Ethan followed, locking it behind him and checking every window. The storm intensified, howling through the cracks of the old cabin. Inside, the fire sputtered, and the shadows on the walls seemed to twist with the wind. He moved to the table, grabbed his phone, and called Sergeant Pierce. The line buzzed twice before a groggy voice answered. "Brooks, you all right?" "There's been movement out by my property," Ethan said quietly. "Truck with no plates, possible surveillance. I've got tracks around the house." Alan's tone hardened. "You think it's Kane?" "I don't think," Ethan replied. "I know." I'll send a unit your way, Alan said. Stay put. Ethan hung up but didn't relax. He went back to the window. The snow was falling thicker now, the world outside reduced to shifting white. The glow from the porch light blurred into a halo, and for a moment he thought he saw movement again, a flicker of black behind the trees. He blinked, and it was gone. Inside, Duke had curled closer to the fire, his tail twitching in his sleep, a soft whine escaping his throat. Shadow lay near the door, awake, his gaze fixed on the window, silent but alert. Ethan checked his weapon, then sat in the armchair facing the door. The old clock ticked steadily, a fragile sound in the storm's roar. Midnight slid into 1, then 2. The house seemed to breathe, creak, listen, and then it came. A sound so soft it could have been imagined. Knock, knock, slow, deliberate, not the frantic rapping of a stranger in distress, but a rhythm measured and patient. Ethan's hand went to his gun. The dogs rose, muscles taut, growls rumbling from their throats. Another knock, slightly louder, followed by silence. Snow drifted past the window in slow spirals. The fire hissed. Ethan stood, every muscle coiled, eyes on the door. Whoever or whatever was outside knew exactly where to find him. Dawn arrived muted and colorless, as if the world itself had been drained of light. The snowstorm had buried Maple Creek overnight, transforming the roads into pale ribbons and the trees into heavy, sagging shapes. At the police precinct, men stamped snow from their boots and wrapped their hands around steaming cups of coffee while the wind screamed beyond the frosted windows. The air smelled of wet leather and gun oil. Inside the small operations room, a dozen officers gathered around a screen showing grainy drone footage, tracks in the snow, tire marks cutting toward the northern mountains. Officer Ethan Brooks stood at the head of the table, still bruised from lack of sleep. His jaw was shadowed with stubble, his eyes bloodshot but steady. He'd been awake all night, replaying the sound of that slow, deliberate knocking on his cabin door. When he finally opened it at dawn, there had been no one there, only a bullet casing pressed into the snow like a message. Now he looked up at the drone feed, recognizing the tread pattern immediately. "That's the same vehicle," he said. "Same tires, same spacing. The black truck from last night." Sergeant Alan Pierce nodded grimly, his thick mustache twitching as he chewed on a toothpick. "We traced it north toward the old quarry. It's been abandoned since the avalanche 5 years ago. If someone's hiding out there, they know what they're doing." The room's door opened, and Agent Nora Valdez from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation stepped in. She was in her late 30s, tall and wiry, her dark hair cut blunt at the shoulders. Her olive skin carried the weary pallor of too many sleepless nights. There was something sharp and coiled about her presence, every movement efficient, every word measured. Rumor around law enforcement circles said she'd once been deep undercover with the Denver narcotics ring before things went wrong, and she rarely talked about it. "We've intercepted a coded transmission overnight," she said, sliding a file onto the table. "Encrypted military channel. The voice pattern matches Victor Kane." The name turned the room to stone. She pressed play on the recording. Static, then a clipped male voice. Cold, deliberate. "Phase 2. Release them both at dawn." "Release who?" Alan asked. Nora's gaze moved to Ethan. "Whoever's with him." Ethan's knuckles tightened around the table's edge. He didn't need to ask who that might mean. Duke and Shadow sat near the door, leashed but alert, their eyes following every sound. The older dog's coat shimmered under the fluorescent light, while Shadow, younger and darker, fidgeted with restless energy. They'd recovered some strength overnight, but their ribs still showed beneath the fur. Within the hour, a convoy rolled out of town, 3 trucks fitted with snow chains, headlights cutting tunnels through the blizzard. Ethan rode in the lead with Nora and Alan. The heater rattled, but the air inside still felt cold. Nora reviewed satellite maps on her tablet, pointing to a jagged stretch of mountain near the Silver Pine Range. That's where the radio signal originated. The quarries here used to store mining explosives. Perfect place for someone who doesn't want to be found. Ethan's gaze stayed fixed on the white horizon. He's not just hiding, he said. He's planning something. The road narrowed into a frozen trail, and they had to continue on foot. The snow came in bursts that stung their faces, and visibility shrank to a few feet. The wind howled like an animal. Ethan led the way, Duke and Shadow trotting close behind. The team moved in formation, Nora scanning the slope with her rifle, Alan covering their flank. 2 younger officers, Reed and Harlow, trailing with the radio pack. Reed was a broad-shouldered rookie with freckles and too much energy, while Harlow, quiet and pale, had eyes that flicked nervously to every shadow. Hours passed before they reached the quarry, an open wound in the mountainside, its floor half buried under ice. Rusted machinery jutted out of the snow like bones. Ethan signaled for silence and crouched behind an overturned loader. The storm had dulled to a whisper, leaving only the hiss of the wind between the cliffs. Then Shadow froze. His tail went rigid, head lowered, ears locked forward. A low growl rippled from his throat. Ethan followed the dog's gaze to a dark opening in the rock, a cave half hidden by fallen snow. "There," he murmured. "He's in there." Alan motioned for the others to spread out. "Reed, stay by the entrance. Harlow, with me." Ethan and Nora advanced into the cave, flashlights cutting narrow beams through the darkness. The air inside smelled of iron and oil. Chains hung from the walls, and the ground was littered with empty food cans and cigarette butts. Then the beam of Nora's light caught something. A row of iron cages, identical to the ones found behind the market, standing empty. The metal bars were streaked with rust and something darker, blood. Ethan's stomach turned. "He was keeping them here," he whispered. At the far wall, an old military radio flickered, still powered. A soft hiss filled the silence, followed by the distorted male voice again. "Phase 2. Release them both at dawn." Nora leaned closer. "It's looping," she said. "He left it running to bait us." Before Ethan could respond, Shadow barked sharply, spinning toward the entrance. Heavy footsteps echoed from the tunnel behind them, fast, deliberate. Ethan swung his flashlight, catching a glimpse of movement, a tall silhouette breaking through the gloom. "Down!" Alan shouted from outside. The cave erupted in chaos. A flash of metal, then a burst of sound, boots crunching, a shout, the dogs snarling. Ethan barely had time to turn before something hard slammed into the back of his head. His vision fractured into white. The world tilted. He saw Duke lunging, Shadow barking furiously, the echo of gunfire swallowed by the storm. Then everything went black. When Ethan opened his eyes, the world burned red. Smoke hung thick in the air, the taste of gasoline sharp against his tongue. His wrists ached, bound tightly by nylon cords. Flames licked the edges of old wooden beams, and through the haze he could make out 2 iron cages in the corner. Inside them, Duke and Shadow struggled against the bars, their claws scraping the metal, their eyes wide with fear and fury. Around them were half-empty gas cans spilling into the dirt floor, the liquid gleaming like melted gold in the firelight. A slow, deliberate voice broke through the crackle of flames. "You should have stayed in your hole, Officer Brooks." From the shadows stepped Victor Kane, tall and broad-shouldered despite the years in hiding. His hair was silver now, slicked back, the lines on his face carved deep by rage and obsession. His once olive skin had taken on a pallid hue under the dim light, and his eyes, cold, gray, calculating, were the kind that had seen war and decided mercy was a weakness. He wore a dark coat, the kind issued to private security, and beneath it, a pistol hung loosely from a shoulder rig. "You took everything from me, my men, my business, my freedom." He crouched near Ethan, his breath sour with whiskey. "Now I'll take everything from you." Ethan's head throbbed. He tried to push himself up, but felt the sting of a kick to his ribs. A second man emerged from behind a stack of crates, Tomas Vega, Kane's lieutenant. He was shorter, stockier, with a scar slicing from his chin to the corner of his mouth. His hair was cropped close, revealing a neck tattoo of a serpent wrapped around a skull. Vega had once been a street soldier in Denver's South Side before Kane found him and turned him into muscle. He was loyal, but only to fear. "Should I start the fire, boss?" he asked, voice gravelly. Kane smiled faintly. "Not yet. I want him awake when it happens." He turned to the cages, his boots crunching over shards of glass. Duke growled, the sound low and primal. Kane chuckled. "Still loyal, aren't they? That's the problem with your kind, Brooks. You teach them to love you, then act surprised when love gets them killed." He picked up a lighter from the table, a silver Zippo engraved with a military emblem, and flicked it open. The flame reflected in his eyes. "You took my liberty. Now I'll take your family." Ethan strained against his bindings until the cord bit into his skin. "They're not just dogs," he said, his voice hoarse. "They're better men than you'll ever be." Kane's smile faded. "Then they can die like men." He dropped the lighter. Fire raced across the floor, feeding on the fuel, climbing the walls in seconds. Vega stepped back, shielding his face from the heat. The air turned molten. Ethan's lungs screamed. He rolled to his side, saw a broken shard of glass on the ground, and began sawing frantically at the cords. Duke barked, loud and desperate. Shadow threw himself against the bars again and again, teeth gnashing at the lock. The metal bent, but didn't break. Outside, the blizzard roared, the wind battering the walls as if trying to smother the fire. Ethan cut through the last of the rope and staggered up. His hands shook as he grabbed a crowbar from the floor and rushed toward the cages. "Hang on!" he shouted. He smashed the first lock. Duke lunged out, barreling straight into Vega, knocking him off balance. The second lock broke a heartbeat later, and Shadow leaped free, going for Kane. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Kane fired once. The shot went wide as Shadow bit down on his forearm. He cursed, slamming the dog against the wall, but Shadow held on. Duke hurled himself at Vega again, pinning him to the ground, jaws locked around his sleeve. Ethan dove for the gun Kane had dropped, snatching it from the floor. "It's over!" he shouted, coughing through the smoke. "It ends now!" Kane wiped blood from his arm, his expression twisting into something between pain and pride. "You really think they'll let you walk away from this?" he hissed. "You've got no idea what's coming." Then, with a sneer, He drew a second pistol from his belt, but before he could aim, Duke struck, ramming him backward into the burning wall. The flames engulfed the crates, the gasoline igniting with a roar. Ethan grabbed the dogs, pulling them toward the door. "Move!" he shouted. The three of them burst through the collapsing doorway just as the roof gave way behind them. The explosion sent a wave of heat and light into the night, sparks scattering across the snow like fireflies. They fell into the snowbank outside, the cold biting at their skin, steam rising from their coats. Distant sirens wailed. Alan Pierce's convoy, drawn by the explosion. Patrol cars slid to a stop, lights flashing red and blue against the storm. Officers swarmed the scene, weapons drawn. Nora Valdez led them, her face streaked with frost, eyes blazing. "Hands where I can see them!" she shouted. From the flames, a figure stumbled out. Victor Kane, coughing, his coat aflame. He raised his gun, but it was too late. Alan's shot rang out, sharp and final. Kane collapsed onto the snow, the weapon falling from his grasp. Ethan knelt beside Duke and Shadow, running a trembling hand through their fur. Both were alive, though battered and burned. Their chests rose and fell in sync with his own, three survivors bound by something stronger than duty. "You're safe," he whispered. "We're safe." The sirens faded into silence, replaced by the soft hiss of snow falling over embers. Months later, Maple Creek stood beneath a gentle snowfall. The town square glittered under winter sunlight as a crowd gathered. Flags fluttered. Children waved small banners. On the steps of the courthouse, Chief Marlowe, a stout man in his 60s with a booming voice and kind eyes, pinned two gleaming medals onto Duke and still Shadow's collars. Ethan stood beside them in full uniform, his face solemn but proud. Cameras flashed, applause thundered. As the ceremony ended, Ethan looked toward the horizon where the mountains met the sky, flakes drifting through the golden dusk. He whispered, "Loyalty can't be bought, and it can't be lost." Duke nudged his hand. Shadow barked once, soft and content. The crowd's cheer swelled around them, carrying warmth through the cold. They said the fire should have taken them, that no man and no dog could have walked out of that inferno alive. But maybe some battles aren't won by strength or luck alone. Maybe, just maybe, there was a hand greater than their own guiding them through the smoke. Because when Ethan knelt in the snow, holding Duke and Shadow beneath the falling light of dawn, something sacred filled the silence, a warmth that no winter could steal. Perhaps that was the miracle of Maple Creek. Not the survival, but the love that refused to die. The kind of love that reminds us that even when the world turns cold, God still leaves a spark inside us, small, quiet, but powerful enough to light the way home. So if you've ever lost something you loved, if you've ever stood in the dark wondering if hope was gone, remember this story. Miracles don't always roar from the heavens. Sometimes they whisper through the breath of a loyal friend, a second chance or a sunrise after the storm. Before you go, share this story with someone who still believes in goodness, or someone who's forgotten how. Leave a comment. Tell us what loyalty means to you, and if you believe, whisper a prayer tonight for every lost soul still fighting their way home. May God bless you, protect your family, and keep the light of faith burning, no matter how heavy the snow may fall. And if this story touched your heart, like and subscribe, so together we can keep telling tales where love and loyalty still win.